witchcraft movies often reach cult status. We're talking The Craft and Practical Magic, but some of them fly under the radar. And today we're talking about a movie I had never heard of before some of you recommended it to me. This is what the Love Witch got right about witchcraft and especially Wicca. If that intro sounded really familiar, it's because this is actually part 2. If you would like to go and watch part 1, I will leave it linked up here. Unfortunately, I got to the end of filming and I realized that this video was just way too big for me to be able to put it all in one place. So I apologize, I've had to split it. My editing software just couldn't cope with it, and I hope that you do enjoy this episode. Now, this is where we start seeing it getting more horror-based. So she meets a man, and she gives him a love potion. Now, she does this by telling him to drink, and he doesn't know what's in it, and she just says, just finish it all. Please don't do this. While I do understand that love potions are a significant part of certain traditions, if you run the risk of causing someone physical harm, as we're going to see in this, that's something that is really concerning, especially if we don't know how allergic someone could be to something, we don't know what medication that they're taking. For instance, something with St. John's wort in it can really negatively impact your medication if you do take it. And so it's really important that we don't purposefully cause physical harm to other people, especially if what we're aiming for is a romantic relationship. Causing someone harm in the process just isn't the way to go. Now, this is where I'm going to start skipping over some of the less than appropriate scenes. So they have relations, and then she goes into another room and she does a tarot card reading. Now, again, we're getting that Rider-Waite-Smith back in again. She pulls the 5 of Cups, the Tower, and the 3 of Swords. Now, that card is the one that I spoke about earlier. So let's start with the first card. This is the 5 of Cups. Now, this is essentially the card of crying over spilled milk. That sounds really harsh, but essentially what's happening here is the figure in the center is focusing so intently on these cups down here, the ones that have spilled over. They aren't paying attention to these cups which are actually full. And this is that idea of focusing on the wrong thing. Yes, some things might have gone wrong in your life. Yes, romantic relationships might not have always gone right, but that does not mean that your life is over. And Elaine in this situation is very much focusing so much on these over here, these spilled cups. She's not paying attention to any of the good things in her life. She's almost tunnel visioned in on this one thing being a massive problem, and that is going to cause her issues. We then have the Tower. Now, the Tower is all about sudden and dramatic change. It is all about building something on solid foundations. If it is not built on solid foundations, it is going to come crashing down. It is a card of dramatic and sometimes unavoidable change. That change doesn't necessarily mean it's going to destroy your life, but it does mean that change is coming. And then we have the 3 of Swords, which is commonly a card of heartbreak. It's a card of emotional distress, emotional turmoil. So when we've got these 3 things together, it is very, very much saying that you're focusing on the wrong thing. And because you're focusing so much on this bad stuff here instead of the good stuff over here, you're not listening. You're not fixing your mistakes. You are repeating the same cycles. And so it's going to come crashing down all over again. And then what's going to happen? More heartbreak. These are the kind of readings that commonly come up when we're using tarot. And also these 3-card spreads are probably the most popular. They're what I started using when I began reading tarot, with single card draws every single day and then 3-card spreads. So you can have it be past, present, future. That may well have been what this was. So this could well have been the past, the idea of not letting go of past relationships, only focusing on the bad. This could then be the present, the fact that everything is about to go wrong, which it will in a minute. And then we're going to be leading to even more heartbreak. So at this point in time, Wayne, the man that she gave the love potion to, is incredibly ill. This potion that he has drank is killing him, basically. She is saying that he's dying because she just loved him too hard, but he actually dies of heart failure. And she ends up making what is later described as a witch bottle. Now, this is a little bit graphic, so I'm not going to show like the entire scene of this, but she pees in a jar. She adds in some moon blood on an object that is used to gather moon blood. I'm sorry, YouTube really doesn't like talking about these topics, and I've spent too long focusing on this video to get it demonetized. I'm sorry. And then inside she also adds rosemary as well as nails. Now she says that she does this so that she can be buried with Wayne. And that's because a witch bottle is akin to a taglock. It contains a lot of personal items and personal things of you that are often used in protection magic. So I've spoken about witch bottles many times before, but a witch bottle in this form is a very traditional form of witch bottle. We see them being used throughout the early modern period, and they're typically buried beneath a hearth. That's actually spoken about later. Now, I do all these videos chronologically, so you'll have to wait a little bit to get to that. But they talk to an occult expert later on, and he goes into like all of that stuff. But essentially, what would be done is a person who was being afflicted by witchcraft, so this is the victim of that, would create a witch's bottle. They would pee in a bottle or a jar. Typically, they were Bellarmine bottles. These are stoneware jars and bottles. This was added in because they believed that the energy or the essence of a witch stayed with their target after that spell was performed. So if a witch had performed a curse on you, part of their energy is now stuck within you that's manifesting that curse. And that is also going to be present in your bodily fluids, such as your urine. So they would pee into a jar, they would add killed pins or nails into that jar, killed as in bent, broken or snapped, as a way of harming that witch, essentially. It stops it from working in the physical world and it makes it ritually work in the spiritual plane. That gets added in as well. They may well add hair, nail clippings, and then they would seal up that jar and they would heat it. And that jar then became a representation for the witch's bladder. So you are heating up that urine with all those sharp objects in it. I mean, some have even been found with grass as a substitute for nails. So if you think that substituting items in spells is only done in the modern day, it is not. We have found witches' bottles from, I believe they were 17th century, with grass inside, like sprigs of grass, because they were pointy. And so whoever made the witch's bottle thought they were a suitable substitute for the sharp, pointy nails or pins. Super interesting. Anyway, that's a topic in its own right. These would then be added in as a way of irritating, and then all of that gets heated. And if the witch didn't come back and apologise, that was then buried under the hearth as a way of continuing that irritation until the witch came back and undid that spell. Now, it's important to remember that during this time period, witch was used as a derogatory term. It was used to represent a practitioner of malefic magic. They were different from the witches, wise folk, cunning folk, and peddlers that were selling positive magic, healings, and fertility workings, and they were countering the malefic magic of the witch. So in this, there's some things that have obviously been changed here. So we have rosemary being added in, which rosemary is a protective agent. It's also used in good luck and abundance workings. And all of this is then being stored with Wayne at his burial site, which confuses me a little bit because witches' bottles are used by practitioners today. They're used by non-practitioners and practitioners as a form of protecting against unwanted energies and spirits. They're essentially a scapegoat working, so any energy that is targeted at you will go into the witch's bottle because it feels like you. It has your energy because it's got the urine and in this case the moon blood in it as well. I'm a little confused though as to why this was buried with Wayne, unless it was literally just designed to be like this part of me is going to stay with you forever kind of a vibe, which is what I mean when I say that they did so much good and then they throw in this occasional weird like out of left field thing where you're like, whoa, that doesn't seem to match anything else. I'm not sure if they did that just to kind of separate it a little bit more from reality, make it a little bit less realistic just to cover all of their like bases to protect themselves. I don't know. But throughout this movie, we do see there's a lot of negative stigma surrounding the witches. So when a different man is found deceased with a pentagram carved into his chest, all of the locals proceed to say that it's those witches again. And we see the stigma surrounding witchcraft again and again and again. Now, I feel like here is really useful for me to say it. Now we recognise that Wicca and witchcraft are different because we have enough research. Now we know that Wicca as a religion was created in the 1930s, 1940s, released to the public in the late 1940s, early 1950s, gained popularity in the 1960s, 1970s, witchcraft has been practiced for thousands of years in varying different ways. And while Wicca is based on pre-existing witchcraft practice, the actual history of Wicca is very new. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I think it's really important to be aware, though, that during the 1950s and 60s, many people genuinely believed that Wicca was an ancient practice that had gone unchanged from pre-Christian times. You can see this in the work of Margaret Murray, who genuinely believed that Wicca was this witch cult that had been going on for hundreds, thousands of years. We now know that that isn't the case. What we do see is that magical tradition and witchcraft, both what we see it as today, which would have been previously the wise folk, the cunning folk, the peddlers, as well as malefic forms of witchcraft, have existed for thousands of years across the world in varying different forms and traditions. They are seen today as being different. In the 1960s, they would have been considered one and the same, and so Wiccans would be referred to as witches, and they would refer to themselves as witches. So I do think that that is a really useful distinction to make here. The people who practice within this coven refer to themselves as witches. Other people also refer to themselves as witches. Today, they may be considered Wiccan witches. They may be considered just Wiccan. They may be considered just witches, depending on what the individuals choose to refer to themselves as. I don't know if that made any sense. I'll be honest, I've been filming for over 2 hours now. I feel like I'm going a little bit doolally. I'm hoping that that made sense, but I think it is really interesting that we can see this kind of language is very much tailored to the time frame of this movie. And because it was made in 2016, that's a very purposeful choice. You know, it would be different if this movie had been made in the 60s, about the 60s. But this has been made in 2016, about the 60s. So this is very clear signs to me anyway, that there's a lot of knowledge that's gone into this. This is also the point in this where we can see that Elaine's practice is quite different to other members of the covens. She meets up with Barbara and also the high priest, whose name I have completely forgotten. So Barbara is the high priestess, he is the high priest, and she confesses to using love spells, and she confesses to what's happened. And it is said, quote, "Love spells never work the way you think they will." And she's given a warning by the high priest that, like, she maybe should not be doing this. And this is true. All spells have the chance to go awry, and it's why it's really important that we make them very carefully, that we choose our wordings and our intention very specifically, and that we make sure that we close as many loopholes as possible. I know I've spoken about this in previous videos of if you want money from your work, say you're thinking perhaps promotion, but instead of getting a promotion, you actually get into an accident at work and you end up with compensation from your job. You've technically got what you asked for. You got money from your job, but you didn't get it in the way that you wanted, which is why making sure you close those loopholes, making sure that your wording is accurate is really, really useful, and targeting situations more than people is very effective because it means that you aren't going to get people tangled up in this kind of situation where things start going wrong. While they're having this conversation, they have a toast and they say the words, quote, "Thank you, Goddess, everywhere, for the blessings that we share, blessed be." Now, I don't believe this is something that every coven will do in the same way, but some kind of toast is commonly given, especially during ceremony and ritual, espat celebrations and the like. You would often say something, and then you would give a libation of that alcohol, whether that's wine, whether that's mead, whether it's just a drink of your choice. You would give that to the earth. You would also potentially give it to the god and the goddess as well, and then you would consume some for yourself. The priest and the priestess then go on to talk about the different classes that the coven offers, and I know that this is just like a little bit in passing, but it very, very much describes that they know what they're talking about here. So some of the classes offered are sigil magic, orgonite alchemy, energy grounding, earth-based spirituality, pagan arts and crafts, candlework, spellcraft masterclass, ancient mysticism, herbs and spices, and sex magic. And all of those things are real practices that we can learn and carry out ourselves. So definitely shows that they are purposefully changing things because they definitely know the reality of stuff in this, which I think is really cool. Now, very briefly, we do see Elaine using a witch's flying ointment. Now, these have been documented for hundreds of years, and they've actually been a really curious topic for a long time, because while we have record of them existing, the exact contents have not always been known. Now, flying ointment is not used for physical flight. It's typically used for what's known as astral projection, and it's believed to be one of the ways that the witches travelled to the witches' Sabbath. They would be using flying ointment as a way of travelling astrally. This is also known as spirit flight and hedge riding, depending on your specific tradition. Now, I don't want to go too much into this. They are incredibly dangerous if done wrong, because they contain a large number of entheogenic plants that can literally make it so that you don't see tomorrow. So they are still prepared by some practitioners who are very knowledgeable. I wouldn't recommend attempting any of the original recipes without a great deal of knowledge and experience, because I wouldn't want anything horrible to happen to any of you. But it's really interesting to me that they have included that in. Now, we then see the next little snippet of Elaine's initiation, and this is where things start going downhill. And I think this is probably why they haven't made things entirely accurate, because they knew where they wanted this movie to go. It is, after all, a comedy horror. And what happens during this initiation is incredibly wrong. People are doing things that they should not be doing. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is a very sensitive topic, so I'm not going to go too much into it. What I will say, though, is this should never, ever, ever happen in a Coven environment. Everyone in that environment should be fully aware of everything that is going to happen. They should be told step by step what's going to happen in that initiation in advance, so they are aware. They need to be able to make an informed decision, and you cannot make an informed decision without all of the information. So everything is done with the trust of the group. Everything is done with the respect to all of the individuals involved. Nothing should ever be done without your consent or your permission. Point blank. Period. I don't care what anyone says. Oh, well, it's tradition. Oh, well, it's part of the Coven. I'm sorry, if you are overstepping what has been consented to, then you are just not a very nice person. I don't care if it's in the name of ritual. That's not how this works. And this is why I think it's really important to emphasize that you find a good Coven. Some Covens out there are going to be horrible. The majority of them are going to be really nice. It is very important, though, to take your time to choose an appropriate Coven. Make sure that you are finding people that you can trust, that are willing to allow you to learn, that are going to let you in on the process. Now, they don't need to be telling you any of their oath-bound secrets, but what they should be telling you is what is involved in that process. And if they aren't going to tell you that, that's a massive problem. I have an entire video on Coven red flags. I will leave linked up here if you do want to check that out. And ultimately, if you ever feel uncomfortable in that situation, you can leave at any point. And if they won't let you leave, then that is a whole other set of red flags. This is why being skyclad should be something that is a choice. If they are not allowing you to have that choice, then leave. Any of the skyclad rituals I've carried out, I have done so in my own home, within the privacy of my own home, with no one else around. Personally, I wouldn't choose to do that with other people or with a Coven environment. That's just my choice. Other people might feel differently, but the important thing is that you feel comfortable to make that choice. And you also feel comfortable to express that choice. If other people within that group want to be skyclad and you don't feel comfortable being there, they should not be forcing you to be there. Simple as. And I feel like this entire movie is a giant PSA on abuse of power. And that applies to Elaine's abuse of power of love spells, and it also applies to the Coven's abuse of power over their Coven members. And we see this again and again. I'm not going to show any of those clips, but the entire movie is basically just a PSA over power abuse. Now, during all of this, the police are made aware that Wayne, that initial man that she met, has gone missing. And they have found what Elaine left behind at the scene, including the witch's bottle. And so he goes to the professor of occult science at the local university, who understands all sorts of witchy things, or at least for the purpose of the movie, he understands all sorts of witchy things. On the walls are posters which contain magical symbols from old manuscripts. Some of them, however, are modern creations. And he is given the witch's bottle to look at and is asked if he knows what it is. And he says, quote, "Witches used to make them as protection against curses. They take something personal, like bodily fluids or hair, along with herbs and something sharp, like pins or broken glass. They scare away evil spirits. Witch bottles are often found buried beneath the hearth in old houses. Yes, that's actually pretty true when you think about it. Now, historically, witches' bottles didn't necessarily contain herbs, and they didn't necessarily contain broken glass, but as I mentioned earlier, with people using literally blades of grass as a substitute for sharp objects, it wouldn't surprise me if people also used broken pottery, things like that. It is important to remember, though, that historically, glass was not as accessible as it is today, and so it was very unlikely that they would be purposefully breaking glass because it was so expensive, but definitely other sharp objects were probably used as well. This professor then goes on to say that witchcraft has now taken root in civilized cities and that they have several celebrations a year, and they came so close to getting this right, so close. So he says that witches celebrate Samhain in place of our modern Halloween, and then he says, quote, other rituals celebrate the summer solstice, Letha, or the winter solstice, which they call Imbolg. So close. You were one Sabbath out. The summer solstice is Letha. The winter solstice is Yule. Imbolg is actually a celebration that occurs on either the 1st or 2nd of February, and it is considered one of the fire festivals, a celebration of the goddess Brigid. They came so close, and I feel like someone either just slightly slipped up there or they genuinely just wanted to separate it even further from reality. But yeah, so sad that they came that close. Now, and then, as usual, they talk about the witch's Sabbath, and then things start going a little bit downhill from here, where he says, quote, here the members of the Coven kiss the devils behind in mockery of Christian rituals. Here, a satanic cult sacrifices a child, and he's going through different pictures in books that very much remind me of the Malleus Maleficarum, but I'm pretty certain that it isn't. And essentially going through to say that they are directly opposed to Christianity, and that they are evil and they're eating children and sacrificing babies, which we all know isn't true, but equally, during this time period, witchcraft had only just been made legal in this country. Now, this is in this country. I'm talking primarily about England. That doesn't apply the same everywhere else. Even now, if you talk to someone very, very religious in the Bible Belt, they will say that witches are Satanists and that witches are sacrificing babies and they are performing evil magic to curse the world. That kind of opinion still stands to this day. That doesn't mean it's right, but it still exists. And so it really doesn't surprise me that during this time, this would also be a fairly common opinion among everyday peoples. And then he goes on to say the one thing that just rubs me the wrong way every single time. He then goes on to say, quote, those who practice human sacrifice are black witches, who perform blood rituals to gain demonic powers and to bind their members together in secrecy. And it continues on with, then there are the white witches, the Wiccans, who commune with nature and the healing spirit, who have strict laws that forbids harming others. Every city and rural village today is populated with black and white witches who practice the ancient rites. Now, while this statement does irritate the hell out of me, as it would if it was said today, I do think, though, in the context of the time period, it actually is fairly reasonable for them to be saying this, because during this time, Wicca was very, very much attempting to separate itself out from the stigma of pre-existing witchcraft. While today, witchcraft is perceived as being the practice of magic. It is manifestation in accordance to will. It is seen as being the same as the Pellers, the wise people, the cunning folk. Historically, it wasn't. Historically, witchcraft was seen as being malefic. It was dangerous. It was causing illness and death. It was causing plague and blight. It was causing disease of animals and crops. It was a very, very malefic thing. And during the time of Gerald Gardner, when we're seeing Wicca being more mainstream, he did a lot of interviews where he was attempting to separate it out from the belief systems of the pre-existing witchcraft. There's a lot of talk about, no, we don't cause harm, no, we don't believe in the devil, no, we don't sacrifice babies, because for everyday people, that was what witchcraft was associated with. This was before Bewitched. This was before The Craft and Charmed. This was before Harry Potter and the popularity of magic in media. This was when people very much still believed witchcraft to be the same as it was during the witch trial period. And so Wicca and the prominent Wiccans at the time, we're talking Raymond Buckland, we're talking Gerald Gardner, we're then talking Doreen Valiente, we're talking Stuart and Janet Farrar. These people really made a massive effort to separate Wicca, this modern form of practice, from pre-existing very negative forms of practice. And so this kind of terminology makes total sense for a movie like this. Would I use this terminology today? Definitely not. Do I think it is applicable in this context, however? Yeah, pretty much. And then we also have the mention of witches following particular laws that stop them from committing harm. I do think it is important to note here, though, that what we see today as the Wiccan Rede actually wasn't added in till a later point. So the Wiccan Rede did not exist in the way it does now when Gerald Gardner first released Wicca to the world. It just didn't. It was a newer edition that just kind of stuck. Now, this is the point where we see that ritual where I spoke about the headdresses at the very, very start of this video. I'm honestly surprised I even remembered that because I've already been filming for 2.5 hours. My memory is usually like a sieve. I should have forgotten that by now. But we see the priest and the priestess in their full ritual wear. If you would like to see formal ritual wear, I would recommend, if you live in the UK, going to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle, where they have some there. They have the headdresses, they have the cloaks, they have everything. It's incredible. Actually incredible. But this kind of ritual wear is usually reserved for big ceremonies. So we're talking sabbats, these would be the 8 spokes of the wheel of the year, or we're talking espats, these would be full moon celebrations, although they may not by all covens be considered as significant as the sabbats. And then we would also have initiations, wickenings, handfastings, and the like. And here we see the priest having the antlers of the horned god, and we see the priestess having the metalwork and the moons of the moon goddess, because there's often this duality of the horned god and the moon goddess. Now, the gods and goddesses in this movie are named, and they are also named in this book. They aren't necessarily always named, and also they may differ from coven to coven, but we see this ritual taking place. So we then see some invocations taking place. So it said, quote, "I invoke and call upon thee, mighty mother of us all. I invoke thee to descend upon the body of this, thy servant and priestess." And this is one of the many ways that gods and goddesses are utilised within Wicca. They are called upon, and the priest and the high priestess are used as vessels almost. They are representations of these two figures within the ritual setting. Sometimes this involves the invocation of these beings. Sometimes it is simply the representation of, for instance, during the Great Rite, 2 members of the coven, typically the priest and the priestess, would be in union. Let's go with that, with one another, as a representation of the Great Rite. The Great Rite being the union of the god and the goddess as a way of creating all of existence, because life exists through the passions of the flesh. I'm trying to find ways of saying this in any way that's not going to get me demonetized, and honestly, at this point, I think I might be fighting a losing battle. Anyway, we do see this kind of thing occurring in these Wiccan ceremonies. The high priestess then steps into this circle with all of the coven members sky-clad around her and says the following: "Of the mother, darksome and divine, here I charge you with this sign." And she carries out the summoning pentagram. Now, the reason that I am pretty certain that they used this book as their reference for this is that entire ritual is actually right there. This is the summoning pentagram. You do it in a particular order to summon and to open up that ritual, and then you do the opposing version of it when closing. And actually in this, if I can find the page that it's on, we do actually have right there, we have the closing version of this. We have the banishing pentagram. So the fact that they included this definitely shows to me that they used a book like this. It might not have been this exact book, but it was definitely something very similar to this, because so many of the rituals are almost identical with bits cut out for the purpose of the movie. The priest then goes on to say, quote, "Listen to the words of the Great Mother, she who of old was also called Artemis, Aphrodite, Ceridwen, Diana, Isis, and by many other names." So as mentioned previously, you can have lots of different goddesses, you can have just a few, and any of you who enjoy pagan music may well recognise the word darksome as belonging to the Witch's Rune, which is a really popular song, which is actually an adaptation of some of the opening ritual within certain Wiccan traditions. So there you go, just a bit of random information, and if you want more about that, there's actually an entire section in here, it's all written out right there for you. That is a version of the Witch's Rune specifically for an opening ritual. And then while all this is happening, surprise, Elaine has actually seduced her friend's husband. Yeah, Trish, the interior designer from the very start, yeah. She's now given a love potion to her husband, and he is not doing okay. And so he does a tarot reading, because why else would an everyday person do a tarot reading unless shit has massively hit the fan in their life? And he gets 3 cards. He gets the 9 of Swords, he gets the 3 of Swords again, and then we also get the Devil. Now, these cards are, once again, fairly self-explanatory, I suppose, just based off the imagery. So let's start with the 9 of Swords. Now, this is a card that myself and many others call the 3 a.m. card. It is essentially that feeling when you're lying in bed and you're thinking of every bad thing and every embarrassing thing that you have ever done in your entire life. Yeah, that's this card. This is that card where you are running over everything in your mind. Nothing seems to make sense to you. You cannot escape it. You cannot relax. You cannot sleep. It is all you can think about. All of this bad here is hanging over your head constantly. And that's what's happening with this guy. What's his name? Richard. I'll be honest, there's so many guys in this movie. I'm terrible with names at the best of times. Faces I'm fine with, names I'm not. He's been given this love potion, and so Elaine is literally all he can think about. She is this sword. And then we have the 3 of Swords, as mentioned, heartbreak. She is essentially admitted to other people that he is not what she wants. He's basically turned into a different person and she doesn't like it. She also mentions that he's a Pisces. That will be important later. But I suspect in all of this that Elaine is actually the swords here. Elaine is what's hanging over his head. Elaine is what's hurting his heart. And then you get the Devil. Now, the Devil is nowhere near as bad as you would think it would be. A lot of the imagery on this card shows that you can get out of those situations. It won't focus on it properly, but if you were to look at the necks of those figures, the Adam and Eve figures that are in this Devil card, they're actually capable of taking those chains off them. There is nothing stopping them from deciding, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm just going to take the chains off. Instead, they're staying put. And this is often a card that represents this unwillingness to change. So we have this hanging weight over him. We have the heartbreak. And there are things that can be done in this situation, but no one is doing them. And that's how we end up with Richard not being around for very long. As we can see, she has a bad track record with men and them ending up not great. And during all of this, the detective is going around trying to figure out what's going on. He goes to the apothecary. The lady who works at the apothecary says that, we have some witch bottles in stock. Here is the person that makes them. And the one thing that I thought was really jarring with this is you would never ever make a witch bottle for someone else, because your urine has to go into that bottle. So if it's designed for protection, if it was to protect me, it would be my urine. If it was to protect you, it would be your urine. I can't put my urine in for protecting you. This is a weird conversation to be having right now. This is just strange, but I hope you know what I mean. It has to be individual to that person. So I suspect they're actually maybe confusing this with a modern witch's bottle, which are used for lots of different intentions. Historically, they were used just for protection, but in modern day, they're typically used for a varying range of different intentions. You can get witch bottles for prosperity, for love, for banishing, binding, protection. They don't necessarily contain urine the same way that they historically did. But what I will say in all of this is what is shown in this shop, in this scene, doesn't look like the witch bottle that Elaine made. What it does look like, though, is the potion that Richard drinks before he disappears off the earth. And so it seems as though she is perpetuating these love spells, even though she doesn't want to be involved anymore. She is perpetuating it. They still have the love potion and they're still taking it. Which is why I say that this entire movie is basically a cautionary tale for be careful of the power that you possess. She needs to be careful and the high priest needs to be careful too. So the police come round and she puts on a whole show of like, oh, you're demonizing my religion. And he buys it. And they are under the impression that they've met before, which technically they did at the very, very start of the movie, but that wasn't really that important, so I skipped it. And they're saying that like, oh, this is an ancient tradition and it's older than Christianity. And she's fully putting on the spiel, right? All this stuff, which, to be honest, I can't even blame the movie for doing, because as I mentioned earlier, at this point in time, most people who were following Wicca did genuinely believe that Wicca was this ancient pre-Christian belief system that has never been changed for thousands of years. It's only now that we see that that's not entirely accurate. So, of course, she's putting on the spiel for the detective, but it also would make sense that someone who has only recently been initiated, by the looks of it, she's only gone through one initiation, so she would be a first degree initiate. She hasn't gone through second and third degrees yet. So she would maybe not be privy to all of the information. She's probably quite new to the practice. And so therefore, it wouldn't surprise me that she genuinely believed that Wicca was this ancient prehistoric tradition that's been around for longer than Christianity. Like, witchcraft and magical practice has been, but Wicca, as we see it during this time period, definitely wasn't. And then she talks about how she did a Celtic cross reading and it depicted her future. And she said that if she ever saw the Knight of Wands, which is this card right here, come up in a reading, she knew that she was about to meet her future husband, like the love of her life. So she had done this reading and it had come through and she's gone, oh my God, you are the person that came to me in that reading. You are my Knight of Wands. You are my quick acting, sweep me off my feet person, because that's what the Knight of Wands is. The Wands is a very driven card. It's a fire card. It's very active. The Knight is one of the, if not the fastest card in the deck, and the Knight of Wands is the fastest of all of the Knights. They are very driven, very quick. They come in, they sweep you off your feet. Everything happens so quickly, and that's what we're going to see in this. Now, the Celtic Cross is a legitimate reading. It has lots of different variations, though. So you will look at like 5 different sources for the Celtic Cross, and every book and every resource is going to be slightly different, but essentially it's a way of identifying issues, the things that are triggering those issues, what you can do to resolve those issues, any limiting factors. Like, it's a very well-rounded reading and it's based off a set spread. Now, tarot spreads don't have to be used. I personally don't use them very often. Like, occasionally I'll throw them in, but usually I don't. Some people will use dedicated spreads where each card has a set meaning, and when it is put down in that spread, that meaning is set. So, say for instance, a past, present, and future spread means if I were to grab just the top 3 cards, say if I put this one in the past section, no matter what that says, that then represents the past. This one would be present, this one would be the future. You can do this with different spreads. So like, what is the issue? How can I deal with the issue? How can I move past it? Is there anyone else involved? And they give you additional information. The Celtic Cross is one of the most famous. It's not my favourite personally, mostly because my card reading is very, cards are going everywhere. They're flying across the room. They're falling off the table. I'm not organised enough to do spreads. I'm like, shuffle, 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 ping, ping. Cards are just ricocheting everywhere. Spreads are not for me, but for some people, they really, really enjoy them and they can be incredibly effective. And that is definitely an accurate spread right there. This is where, if this entire movie hasn't already been a fever dream, this is where the movie turns into a fever dream. And at this point, I was watching this last night, right? I'm lying on the sofa. I didn't finish watching this movie till 4 a.m. because I was determined to get this ready for today. I'm lying there and it at this point is like 20 to 4 or something. And I'm watching this and I'm going, is this actually happening, or am I just so tired that I'm starting to hallucinate? Because like, this entire thing is just the weirdest fever dream ever. Elaine and the sergeant, the detective, whatever he is, the police guy, have gone on a date. And they ride horses, which I personally think is related to this. So she believes that he is the Knight of Wands. He probably is the Knight of Wands. He's coming in riding a steed. He is a knight. I think it all ties into the tarot cards. Actually, I think this entire movie ties into the tarot cards. If you actually look at it, everything that happens in the tarot cards happens in real life, and all of the imagery is the same as well. We'll get to that in a minute. So They go horseback riding and they stumble upon a medieval reenactment that contains members of the Coven. Yeah, they're just there randomly in the woods. And they carry out a summer solstice celebration where they're fighting the Oak King and the Holly King. And so it's even said, quote, "The strength of the Oak King is waning, and the Holly King stands ready to challenge him for the hand of the Green Maiden." Now, the Holly and Oak King are archetypal representations for the shifting of the dark half of the year and the light half of the year. So from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, the days are getting lighter, the days are getting longer. This is the time of the Oak King. When we get to the summer solstice, the Oak King and the Holly King battle it out, and the Holly King succeeds. From this point onwards, the days start waning into the darker half of the year. The nights are getting longer, the days are getting shorter. And then at the winter solstice, they fight again. And this time the Oak King comes out on top, and it is this cyclical, ever-repeating energy. It's simply a way of describing the world around us. It's modern mythology. I don't think I've ever heard of a Green Maiden being involved, though, but who knows, maybe that's just a variation on the tradition. And then they have a hand fasting. Can you see what I mean when I say this sounds like a fever dream? Because at this point, it's like 3:45 and I feel like I have lost it. So they just simultaneously agree to this hand fasting that like all of the Coven is miraculously there for. And they have like wedding dresses there. And anyway, a hand fasting is a pagan ceremony that is akin to a wedding. And depending on where you are around the world, they can be legal. In England, they are as legal as a Christian wedding is. It is legally binding. You can have it done as a formal marriage union, basically. And it is a pagan way of doing it. Many Wiccans will do it, many pagans will do it, many witches will do it. And they're really, really beautiful ceremonies. They're absolutely lovely. They're very often done outside, but they don't have to be. And one of the defining characteristics is the hands are clasped like this. And then a very beautiful, you can get some gorgeous handmade ones, ribbon or cord binds your hands together. And it is a ceremony that is akin to the exchanging of wedding rings. And people do this alongside wedding rings. That's completely fine too. And people don't have to do this as a formal marriage ceremony. So one way that it is done is that a hand fasting is performed and you are then hand fasted for a year and a day. And if after that year and a day you decide that this union is actually not for you, then you can go your separate ways. And if you decide that it is for you, then you would then be legally hand fasted in a formal marriage ceremony. So I like the fact that they included it in, but damn, they just went on a first date and got married. And I think this, again, as I already mentioned, ties in with this rapidness of the Knight of Wands. Everything's very, very quick. This kind of sweep off your feet kind of situation is happening here. It definitely all ties into the tarot. So at this point, we're very, very much coming to the end. This is the very, very end. I'm not going to spoil too much. I'll try. So Lydia finds out that Elaine has cheated with her husband, who is now no longer around, and she loses it. She finds his picture on a shrine that Elaine has made, and she goes through drawers and she finds the spell that was used for Richard, the love spell, with runes from the Elder Furthark runes, which is an alphabet that are commonly used for divination, and they're often used in witchcraft. There's several different varieties, but the Elder Furthark is probably the most popular for divination, and it involves a candle. I'll actually get up the full working, shall I? At the very top, we have a pentagram. It is a ritual pentagram, which contains planetary symbols, and it's a classic ritual pentagram. Now, I have not been able to find the origin of really any of the pentagrams perfectly that are used in this movie. There's lots that are similar. There's lots that I think could probably have been merged together, and I suspect that's probably what's happened. I don't think at this point they will suddenly start using complete ritual pentagrams. I suspect that they're very much making them up for the purpose of not stepping on toes, which I do appreciate. And then below that it says, inscribe the red votive candle with, and then a series of runes. I believe there's 7 of them. Place a cauldron on top of the paper pentacle, which is shown above. Add the red candle and light. And then I'm not sure if the next bit is meant to be verbally said or not, but it says, red candle burn bright as Richard is possessed with burning love for Elaine. drop something of Richard's into the flame with pine needles and marigold flowers, saying, bring Richard to me, and then it's cut off, only me, and come, it's cut off again. Let the candle burn, and then it's cut off, and then it says scrying for signs. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that anyone carry out this working. It is, after all, just from a movie. It's just something that's been created for this. It's probably been adapted from pre-existing workings. This kind of working, though, is very common within candle magic, is something that you would do, depending on what you feel comfortable with. I do think it's a little bit odd to be using a ritual pentagram with runes in this way, but that's just personal preference. I like the fact, though, that they say scrying, because it seems very clear that this entire time, she's been readily using the tarot cards, and scrying is another form of divination. So it is looking, it is observing. So you might fire scry, which I suspect would probably be in this instance, where you are allowing yourself to zone out on that flame, and you can gain insight and inspiration through your psychic means. You can do this with water scrying, you can do it with cloud scrying, you can do it with crystal balls and black mirrors. I have done an entire video on black mirrors. If you do want to check that out, I'll leave it linked up here. But this is really, really interesting to me. But it doesn't end here, because she then finds a poppet that actually has the symbol for Pisces drawn on, like on the stomach area, in red pen, red ink, red something. And this is used as a taglock. This poppet has been linked to Richard, so that anything that is done to the poppet will manifest in Richard's life and also in his mindset and his thoughts. And so this has been used alongside this candle spell as a way of adding further intention into it and linking it directly to him. All of this is really interesting to me because we see the use of a taglock in the item that belongs to Richard being dropped into the flame. We see the marigold flowers and the pine needles, which I will double check. Interesting. So I wonder if this was used for the masculine aspect here, because throughout the entire movie she's had this obsession with giving people the fantasy. And so I wonder, this idea of like a man has to be a man, you know, it's a very stereotypical cliche kind of patriarchal view that makes sense for her character in this world. And the other one was marigold. Now marigold I mainly use for kind of happiness workings, like positive, uplifting, like sunny, because it's a very masculine, very solar based plant. Now let's have a look. Marigold, yeah, masculine, sun, fire. Yeah, so what they've chosen here are plants that are related to the masculine energy. It's this idea of giving them the masculine, the male fantasy. That's basically Elaine's entire character, is the male fantasy. So they've been chosen for that. And once again, it ties back into the whole, like, the herbs that are being used are being chosen because of their association to the elements and the planets. And that's something that we can do within our own practice as well. So Elaine finds Trish in her room with all of these items. And when Trish leaves, she holds Trish's necklace, which has been taken off. And she's like chanting, wanting her to get into a car accident. Now, this doesn't actually manifest, but it is interesting that she's kind of, as the movie has gone on, we're seeing less and less ceremony in any of the rituals that are being performed. I don't know if that was kind of a purposeful thing, but at the very start, everything is highly ritualistic. We have large ceremonies with big groups of people, and as we get towards the end, as Elaine is becoming more and more desperate, we are seeing her resorting to more and more lower magic. Now, that isn't me being derogatory. Higher magic is considered to be very ceremonial in nature. Lower magic is very much working with tactile things. It's connecting with our own energy. It's maybe calling less upon external beings and more working with yourself. And that's probably the best way to describe it. Higher magic often works with things that are outside of you. Deities, spirits, angels, planetary bodies, elementals, whereas lower magic works inwards. It works with the ground. It's rooted into the earth. So see it as being higher as in spiritual and lower as being more earthly based. That's not saying that one is better or superior than the other. As time has gone on, Elaine has been using less and less high magic. She's mostly been working with the things that are around her, the herbs, the candles. She's not calling on goddesses and deities anymore like she was at the start. Instead, she's very much working with taglocks and tactile things that she has. She does, however, go to the Coven to perform a binding spell to bind that police guy, detective, sergeant, whatever he is, to bind her to her in a love binding. Now, this is something that you can do. Generally, though, I wouldn't recommend it because unless that is being entered into mutually, so both parties are being involved in that situation, people tend to ultimately want it undoing because something will happen, things will go wrong, and they'll want it undoing. But in this situation, it is carried out, and now she believes that she is safe, that this guy can never leave because no matter what he finds out about what she's done to these other men, he can't leave her. Unfortunately, that's not how this works. She does, however, say something that's really poignant at this point in time. She says, quote, "Witchcraft is just a way of concentrating energy. It can only work with what's already there. I just use sex magic to create love magic." And yeah, I mean, Elaine is an incredibly flawed person. She is a very heartbreaking character in a way because her self-worth has been so chipped away at by the men in her life that she believes that her self-worth is only tied to the men in her life. And that's why she's been doing this entire thing. And she's not wrong in that witchcraft can't create something out of nothing. It has to have that spark that can trigger a chain of events. So you need to start with something that's likely to happen or potentially likely to happen. All of these men could well have fallen in love with Elaine completely by themselves, but her self-esteem was so low that she never gave them the opportunity. Instead, she forced the point. And so it makes Elaine actually a really interesting character. It's easy to look at this movie and to say, oh, you know, it's just a comedy horror, that's all it is. And yeah, the bad acting is purposefully bad. Like, I've seen some of these actors in other things and they are phenomenal. It's just they're purposefully acting bad for this. It's easy to look at it and be like, oh, it's a bit of a joke movie. But then when you actually get down to the characters, there's some real complexity there in terms of how she perceives her own self-worth alongside the witchcraft. I think it's a really interesting movie. Will I watch it again? No, but that's because I've seen it like 4 times in order to do this video. And then at the very end, it all goes so terribly wrong. And I'm gonna have to spoil the ending, so if you don't want to know, I would recommend not listening to this bit. But I said at the very start that this entire movie ties into the tarot cards. And that's because this is exactly how it ends. This is not something that is simply a visual representation. This is literally what happens at the end. And I'm not going to say anything more than that because demonetization and all that. But that is what the Love Witch got right about witchcraft and especially Wicca. And this video has taken me over 2 years because there was so much information that I had to go to different sources. I had to try and find different people. I had to look for the circles and but this has got to be one of the most jam-packed ones that we have done. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is phenomenal. Agatha All Along is really good as well. But there's something about the detail about the 60s Wicca in this, which is absolutely phenomenal. So I hope that you did enjoy this. I would really appreciate it if you could put some hearts at the end of this video so that I can heart as many of them as I can, because I think it's very fitting. And yeah, this one was a doozy to do. So let me know if you spotted anything that I missed. Now, of course, there's lots of things in here that they got wrong about witchcraft as well. But I like focusing on the things that they got right because I think then that gives future movies an incentive to do things better. You know, I always worry if we're too critical over witchcraft in movies and TV shows, that their response to that will be, okay, well then we won't include it at all. When actually I think it's more, let's praise the things that they got right and maybe give some constructive criticism on what they got wrong. And then also, I forgot to mention it at the very start, be completely aware that these are not documentaries. They are fictional media that just draws on pre-existing information. And so I enjoyed going through this, even though the movie's not necessarily my cup of tea. What did you think about the movie? I would love to know. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a like. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the comment section. And if you do enjoy the magical content on this channel or in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I try to post magical content every single week. And I'm going to be very glad to get Elaine's look off me. The blue eyeshadow with the orange lipstick isn't really my vibe. But you know what? I committed to the bit and we're here. So I'm going to go take this off and look at something that isn't a camera and a filming light because I've been here for a very long time. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you have a marvelous, magical day and I will see you in the next video.